Good day, everyone. I'm Ethan, moderator for this webinar. Welcome everyone for today's webinar, Bootcamp, conducting a workplace investigation techniques to determine facts and writing reports. I would now like to introduce our presenter for today, Dr. Susan Strauss. Dr. Susan Strauss is a national and international consultant, speaker, and trainer in organizational effectiveness and management development. I would now like to hand over the floor to the speaker. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you, and greetings everybody from Minnesota. We are going to be talking today about an area of your responsibility that is critical. It's critical for morale of your organization. It's critical for diminishing your liability. What are the objectives for today? Well, one, we're going to identify the events that would trigger an investigation. How do you know if you really need to do an investigation or not? And we'll list the steps of an investigation. We will explore specific techniques in questioning. We will discuss quality documentation. So we'll summarize some privacy issues. We will explain search guidelines. We will determine how do you determine credibility? How do you draw conclusions? Then we'll look at some of the specific laws that will influence whether or not you conduct an investigation. There's a bunch of them. And we'll talk also about some challenging situations that you might run into, and then writing a formal report. So what are the issues anyway that require an investigation? So just take a couple of seconds and quickly peruse through the slide. So what laws then might require a workplace investigation? Well, all of your discrimination laws, Title VII, ADA, ADEA, etc., and good old HIPAA, federal law specifically. Well, Title VII, which came about in 1964, and then we've got the American Disabilities Act Amendment Act. We just call it ADA for short. The Age Discrimination in Employment Act. Title IX. Now, Title IX is for schools, both K through 12 and post-secondary, and it deals with sex equity in the schools. So it's going to be dealing with sexual discrimination and sexual harassment. Your state, whatever state you're from, you will have a Human Rights Act or a Civil Rights Act, or each state has a different title to the act. LGBTQI plus, pregnancy discrimination, and GINA. GINA stands for Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. Now, why in the world would we want to conduct a workplace investigation? These are some reasons. Is there an actual duty to investigate? Yes, you may need to investigate and discipline. Let's look at a few other times. When do you have to investigate? Well, you've got to look at federal and state safety laws, and that duty is to prevent hazards. Who should conduct a workplace investigation? HR, you investigate as a civil rights issue. How do you consider who should investigate anyway? You wouldn't want them to be drawing conclusions if it was good friends, for example. When I talked about experts, what do we mean by that? You have to, by law, conduct your own investigation. So let's take a look at what a good investigator is. So it's important for you to know those laws. So what else? Are you skilled and knowledgeable about the various laws? So these are some of the qualities that you should look for in an investigator. Now, one of the questions that comes up is, should you involve legal counsel? And if so, when? Develop a plan so that you maintain that privilege. So what communication is actually privileged? So keep that in mind. Internal versus external investigators. So make sure if you bring someone in from the outside that you vet them. Why do we investigate? It's a no-brainer. We do it to reduce liability. So the importance then of the investigation. So all of these are critical. So what are the objectives of the investigation? What are we going to do to remedy the situation for the target. So how will your investigative report and other files be used in the event of future challenges? So what constitutes a complaint anyway? Let's examine it. So let's take a look at this for a minute. When should the investigation actually occur? And then gossip counts as you should have known. So who do you interview anyway? Well, I'm just going to throw these up on the screen. And then experts within the company that you're going to be doing could lead to discipline. So you develop a plan. I think that's it, if I'm remembering correctly. Now, routine, and that you may need to talk again. When you're doing this, you've already interviewed the complainant. Okay, so let's look at questioning tips. And then you just keep asking, well, what happened next and what happened next? Now you're going to interview the complainant. So you can see that there are several different ways in which the complainant might request a remedy. And these are examples of retaliation. And so these are examples that you give them. Now, what documents do you want to review? And also be aware that the National Labor Relations Act has a piece about privacy issues. So what are some policy concerns? So these are some of your policy concerns. And you've got to make sure, and you put this in your policies, that they have an obligation to cooperate. Now, other documents that you will need to review, I'm going to just throw these up on the screen. So these are examples of other documents. Now, do you have to take interim action? Well, when would you do this? That you maintain confidentiality on all of this. Talking to the accused. Now, your questioning style, you want to avoid being accusatory, being intimidating, and if the accused refuses to meet with you, you've got to let them know that this is going to be taken into account when you're making a final determination. So what are some of the challenges and what the consequences will be? You might want to ask whether your attorney wants to do the interview. So how do you avoid false imprisonment allegations? But I did, so I documented it. Now, defamation is something else that can occur throughout the investigation, and it's done through public ridicule and contempt. This tells you some tips on avoiding defamation. Formal versus informal. So is a formal investigation necessary? And this would make it necessary. I'm going to put this up on the screen. So let's look a little bit more at a formal investigation. So you get the idea that there are many times where where the formal investigation is required. Who is a witness? So when you are interviewing witnesses, you go through that same routine statements. When you're interviewing the witnesses, it's the same as with your complainant and the accused. Now, I'm giving you this about taking statements. It's in the literature, so I'm giving it to you. Now, after interviewing each person, review your notes before they leave the room. You place your name on all the documents. Now, here's a one-page handout for you that gets into documentation. Now, what's poor documentation? So you don't label people, and you always make your documentation objective. So here's a handout on documentation. Now, this tells you about credibility, and this you must do for everybody that you interview. It's critical. Then you have to reach conclusions. So let's take a look then. Don't be afraid to make a judgment because you could be wrong. And only about 5 to 10% of investigations are inconclusive because you have to decide who to believe. And then you will identify what was the evidence that you're talking about. If the complaint is not substantiated, this is what you tell the accused. And this gets documented. So you do this follow-up action and you document their responses. So you've got a question. You ask yourself this. So disciplining the offenders, how you're going to stop it. And these are examples of corrective action. Now, when you think about the employee's person or work area, so the best practices then This talks about the overlap of workplace and criminal investigations. So if you failed to conduct a fair and impartial, it demonstrates that you failed to prevent the misconduct from recurring. Probably will create an inference of malice. And these are the issues most likely to be challenged. These are the things that I will look at to determine. That is about it. First of all, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. And I hope that this has been helpful for you. There's a lot involved in conducting an investigation. And writing that final report takes a tremendous amount of time. So in the meantime, have a good day. Thank you for joining us. And thank you as well, Speaker Relations. Bye-bye.